I'm going to be going over the two potential things that, if they're happening in your ad account, will hinder you from running a really effective ad strategy, and how these two things can be present even if your ACoS, total ACoS, all the numbers look really good. All right, so we're going to go over how you can set up your account for long-term success on Amazon. So I do a lot of account audits, and one thing I've seen time and time again is that their account is not set up well for long-term growth. So with Amazon advertising, things getting more and more competitive, it's really important that we're set up in a way that allows us to move with the market. Sometimes we need to get more aggressive on specific targets. Organic ranking influences are still a thing in Amazon advertising, and it's definitely something that we want to take into account. So the first thing is what targets are getting most of your ad spend, and the second thing we're going to go over is campaign structure. So the first one I'm going to go over is targets. So it's very easy for this scenario to happen in high volume timeframes. So like if you have a great Mother's Day gift, or during Q4 if your products sell very well. Oftentimes you'll see things that are working, that are running at a great ACoS, and they're bringing in a large majority of sales, and so you'll naturally increase those bids to gain more traffic and more orders from your advertising. This is wonderful, but you do want to take into account what these targets are. And I don't really recommend that the majority of your ad spend be spent on broader targets. Now, what do I mean by broader targets? What I'm mainly talking about is things like automatic targeting or category targeting. So what happens in these two, targeting types, also in broad as well, is that Amazon is making the decision on what kind of searches you're going to show up underneath these. So for the targeting, Amazon's picking what you show up underneath. Category, again, Amazon's kind of picking the different ASINs that you're going to be targeting. And while these are things that we definitely run inside of all of our client accounts, what often can happen is because these targets will just naturally bring in a high volume of sales. That's just how it happens, because there's more potential for it to target a really large swath of different searches. And so if you're showing up on a bunch of searches, ideally you're converting on all those searches, and the orders just climb, which is phenomenal. However, what potentially can happen long term is if all we're looking at is what is bringing in the highest orders for us. So that would naturally be, again, these larger types. And I would also include broad match in this, because again, it just shows up on a whole different search pages. And so there's a lot of potential to convert there. And so if we're naturally just going with, oh, these have really good ACoS and these have very large orders, let's continuously increase our bids, and we're not taking into account how broad these targeting types are, oftentimes what happens is the accounts just naturally migrate to relying a lot on these broader targets to get us the bulk of the ad sales. What I've found is that accounts that are very heavily reliant on these, again, very broad targeting types, those searches that previously worked don't always work. But the problem is you have one singular bid that you can use to control all of the different searches. You have much less control over where your ad dollars are going. It is also possible that Amazon just says hey, we're not going to show you up for that search anymore. So the search that you were previously getting placements on no longer is the case. And so again, wild swings. What we would like to do in these cases for placements that we really want to sustain a heavy presence on, we want to make sure that we're spending mostly through our manual campaigns and our more targeted types to be able to more incrementally influence where we're showing up on the platform. So one thing that can be very, very difficult is if you have, again, these broader targets and you're seeing these wild performance swings. A great correction for this would be to take those targets that were previously performing inside of those broader types, and then you would migrate them to manuals. The problem with this is that if you migrate a search to a manual campaign and specifically target it, there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to specifically replicate the prior performance. So oftentimes, even though we migrate it to manuals, we have these issues with performance fluctuations, and it's just something you kind of have to ride the wave and optimize through. But if we're already dealing with an account that's in a downward spiral, it can just be pretty messy. You can get out of it, but it's much more difficult to do that after you're dealing with wild performance swings versus identifying that these things are happening in your accounts and then pulling out those search terms, kind of running them in tandem and slowly migrating your spend to, again, the more specific types, because you will, again, be able to more incrementally influence where you're going to show up in your placements and ideally get more aggressive on very specific targets that are working to help influence your organic ranking. So I went over like the issues with it and how you don't want to do this. How do you identify if this is happening in your account? The easiest way to do this is going to be the new targeting tab. It is one of my new favorite things inside of the ad console. If you go into your Seller Central, into the ad console, or if you're a vendor, this works as well, you should see something up at the top that says targeting. So you want to go into the targeting tab, and this is going to give you an insight into all of the targets. So I say targets because this includes keywords, categories, and automatic targeting types as well. And so what you'll do is just simply go to the targeting tab. You might select the last 30 days. You might look at lifetime and then also look at the last 30 days or so, and you would simply sort by spend. What this is going to do, it is going to bring to the top what targets have the most spend in your account, and then you can simply evaluate like how tight or loose this targeting is. Am I spending most on like my ranking keywords? Am I getting really specific with the placements I am spending on? And again, just kind of gauge overall account health. I don't ever recommend making wild swings in accounts of things that are working, but you just can use the targeting tab to be aware of what's going on in the account, and then again, slowly migrate things out of broader targeting and get more specific with it in these specific manuals. Ideally exact match, but if phrase match is working for you, I think that one can be okay as well. So we went over the targeting, how that can create, again, issues with long-term sustainability in the account. So let's talk about campaign structure. There are 3 things that are set at the campaign level that will filter down to all the ad groups that you have contained within that campaign. And those 3 things are some of the biggest levers that you can pull on when it comes to scaling what is inside a campaign. So those 3 things are the budget, the placement percentages, and the bidding strategy. Now, the main lever that really is great for scaling a campaign is definitely the budget. Placement percentages can also give you incremental gains on whatever placements are working best for your account. Oftentimes in ranking campaigns, this is going to be like a top of search placement percentage. Well, what happens when you have an exact, a phrase, and a broad match, and the exact match is working very well, it has some of your top keywords, and you definitely want to increase the spend for that particular ad group? You're kind of out of luck. You can increase the budget for the total campaign, but that's going to filter down again to all the different ad groups. And maybe because you have a broad match campaign in there, or maybe you have some category ad groups in there, that's not actually something that you would prefer to spend a lot of your ad dollars on. And so again, that can create a very tricky situation, because oftentimes, and I think the most frustrating aspect of this is when you have an exact match ad group that is performing phenomenally, and so you definitely want to scale it, but you also have a broad match that is performing really well as well, but you don't necessarily want to increase that one. But again, how I kind of covered in the targeting, broad match typically will just gain a lot of additional searches because it's more broader, there's more things to target. So it's very common for the broad match to end up eating up a lot of the budget, and again, that can create issues with just long-term scale. So if you have a whole bunch of ad groups, or it is possible to have a whole bunch of match types mixed into a single ad group. And in that case as well, you would probably want to scale your exact match, which you can do at the bid level, but another great way to do that is going to be at the budget level or placement percentages. Or maybe you would like to put a different bidding strategy on it to be able to, again, keep moving with the market and getting more aggressive. But you might also have broad match and phrase match in there, and in those cases it's really hard to pull things out and get very incremental with where you're spending your dollars. What we're finding is the brands that are having the most long-term success are the ones that are getting very, very strategic with their ad strategy. And in accounts where things are kind of very broad and everything is just kind of all in one big pile, it's very difficult to get strategic with where you're placing your ad dollars. And again, one of the most annoying scenarios of this is oftentimes the broad match and the phrase match keywords that are in there are performing really, really well. And so you're kind of left with a catch-22 because you might want to move those targets out. However, as I kind of stated before when I talked about moving out performing search terms into a manual campaign, you can't always replicate exact performance because campaigns that have a good history on them just tend to get better performance, and so you're going to lose that if you migrate them. So honestly, the best thing for long-term growth would be to move out the other targets and get more specific with it. But again, you kind of set yourself up for a sticky situation where if you would have just kept a single match type inside of a campaign and possibly built out one campaign, one ad group strategies, you completely avoid these situations altogether and set yourself up in a way that is very easy to, again, move and get more specific with where you're spending your ad dollars. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you have a much better idea of how you can set up your campaigns for long-term sustainable growth. And as always, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I will make sure that they get answered. And if you like more videos like this, consider liking and subscribing. Thanks.